Okay, I think we can start. So welcome everybody to the EOSC-hub webinar on the analysis of business models for acquiring services in the EOSC. I'm Sergio Andreozzi. I'm the head of strategy, innovation, and communications of the EGI Foundation, and also I'm the work package 12 leader for the EOSC-hub project. Together with me today, we have Fotis Karayannis. Most of you know him. He has been working the infrastructure and research infrastructure for the last 20 years, mainly in support role with organizations like ERG, RDA, or S3s. He joined last June the EGI Foundation to support us in this last stream of work, and which results we are presenting to you today to collect your final feedback, and also before we wrap up the final deliverable to submit to the European Commission.
Thanks, Sergio. Good morning, everybody, also from my side. Looking forward to having a nice discussion after the presentations.
The agenda for today is pretty simple. We have first a small presentation from my side where I want to set the scene of this work, and so that you can understand the boundaries. And then I will pass over the mic to Fotis to present the results of the work. And then we will have time for a 15 minutes question and answer session. So the audio and video will be recorded for publishing, while the chat will not be recorded. If you want to say provide inputs or questions to the speakers or to the other attendees, you can do either via chat or via the QA panel, or you can raise your hand. In that case, we can open your mic and you can talk. So let's move then to the first part of this presentation. We are in the domain of the European Open Science Cloud, and that is this European policy that was launched by the Commission in February in 2016 with the communications on the European Cloud Initiative. The European Open Science Cloud is a vision for a trusted federated multi-cloud provider system that allows the idea is to create this ecosystem where there will be availability of services and research data and other research outputs that researchers can easily find, discover, use, and share. And the idea is that this would lead, having an integrated ecosystem would lead to a more efficient research in Europe, to stimulate more innovation and also improve reproducibility of science. It is meant to be a federated ecosystem, so it is there are many actors participating in it, and many from the public funded sector, but also it is foreseen that private sector provider would play a role in this domain. And on the left-hand side, what you can see is the what's called or defined the minimum viable EOSC, that is the minimal set of elements that are foreseen to be needed for this EOSC to be operational. So there is an EOSC core, that is the set of enabling services to allow basically to enable this ecosystem to operate, to provide the capabilities to find other services, research data, to access them, and to reuse or share. Then we have the research data layer, and then we have the EOS Exchange, which is meant to be a marketplace where providers offering research-facing services will be able to connect and to deliver services to for research. Then the idea is that in the EOS Exchange, researchers can find both horizontal common capabilities or more domain-specific services or research data. And here, if we want to zoom into this minimum viable ecosystem, we have this very recent diagram from the EOSC Future project. The EOSC Future project formally is expected to start tomorrow, actually. And this is a diagram from the technical group, where you can see more details on what is each of these components entails. So in the bottom part, you can see the EOSC core with the set of the enabling services or capabilities. On the top, you find the EOSC exchange with both the horizontal services from the current providers or other additional providers that may join. And then you have the vertical pillars, which are the domain-specific services coming from research infrastructures or from other provided that are domain-specific. Then there's this execution framework that is meant to be this kind of capability that allow for services to be composed. And then on the right-hand side and the left-hand side, you can find the cross-cutting capabilities across the core and the exchange that are the interoperability framework and also supporting activities. As you can see, so there are many elements that compose this ecosystem. And the idea here, the question is, how do we find the right structure, the right funding models, the right rules that enable all the actors to participate, deliver value, but also be sustainable. As part of the bit of our journey for the results we are going to present today. Now that we are on the same page on what is the EOSC, then what is the EOSC-hub project? EOSC-hub project is an EC funded project, and that started in January 2018, brought together 100 partners from 53 different countries, so it was quite a large project. And the main goal of this project, actually, we can see it as a first implementation project of the European Open Science Cloud. And actually, it provides many of the components we saw in the previous picture. Already the name EOSC-hub was referring to this concept of what today is more referred as EOS core. It was the idea to provide this set of enabling capabilities to enable this ecosystem to thrive, to have these providers able to connect and deliver services for research. It also mobilized quite many providers offering research-facing services, and those services have been integrated into this hub, and they are available today for research. And there we can find both common services from horizontal infrastructures like EGI, UDAP, or from the community related to Indigo Data Cloud. And also you can find thematic services that are domain-specific. Actually, today is the very last day of this project. So this is the last public event that you will see. And tomorrow, they say the activity will be handed over to the EOSC Future. Looking at the key exploitable results of the project, in this diagram, you see the 9 key results of the EOSC-hub that are mapped on different stakeholder categories. And so you can see, for instance, the internal services in the hub portfolio that are useful component for use in the EOSC core, the EOSC portal marketplace that is more related to the EOSC exchange. And then you have on the top, you have the services for the EOSC service portfolio that are the providers who connected to the exchange using the new terminology. And then we have the cross-cutting capabilities that we saw like in the previous diagram, like the trainings, role participation, service management systems, and so on. And also we have a component here that is specifically on the bottom left or bottom right, specifically designed to stimulate engagement with the industry. So that was the introduction on the EOSC-hub. Now I want to spend just a couple of words on what do we mean by business model. I think this is needed because often when talk about this topic in the public funded sector domain, it is not rare to hear this kind of reaction, like we are non-profit, so business model is about making money. Why we're discussing about this? This maybe it was true in the very early phase of business model design, and when the whole idea was emerged from how to understand how to create a new business and to make it thrive and so on. But also nowadays it's pretty common also to apply this concept to not-for-profit organization. So you can find different definitions of what is a business. Also, one accepted definition that a business is an organization engaged in commercial, industrial, and professional activities. It can be both profit or non-profit. So nowadays it's pretty common also to discuss business model for public organizations who don't have a profit purpose. And then by business model, one of the most common accepted definition is the one from Alex Osterwalder, who says a business model is the rationale of how an organization can create, delivers, and capture value. So it needs to create value, it needs to be sustainable. It does not necessarily need to generate a profit. So that's depending on the area where you operate. And actually, while the business model canvas, that is this one-pager with the 9 key elements that are needed to be investigated when you think about business models, that was emerged initially thinking more about startups and creating new profit organizations. There have been a number of derived work from the business model canvas applied to non-profit organizations. So we find, like, I'll just give you 2 examples here. On the left-hand side, you find the mission model canvas for mission-oriented organization. And on the right-hand side, you find another work on business model canvas for NGOs. So that's to say that the 2 concepts are quite compatible. Another concept that we will use for this part in the presentation, we hear about the concept of pattern. We borrowed this concept from the work from the platform design toolkit. People that developed a methodology to design platforms that enable ecosystem organizations to operate. So it's focusing more on the business model aspect of the platform and how you ensure that it can capture and enable value and can enable an ecosystem organization to interoperate. They use the concept of pattern, which is you can see it as a kind of design principle or that you use when you think about business models. So if you need to create a new business model, you say, okay, what are these design principles I want this business model to include or to address? There are a few of them that we have identified in doing our work. Now we zoom in the work package 12. Given the setting the scene, the work package 12 is the smallest work package of the EOSC-hub project. The title is Business Model and Procurement. It ran for the whole duration of the project in 3 different phases. The first one, we conducted the market research to understand what are the needs from the researchers with regards to services, how they generally access them, and this also how they are supported by the internal IT organizations and so on. It was also, the idea was to try to sketch, identify the initial business models that can underpin the EOSC. That work was published in the Deliverable 12.1, is already approved by the Commission and available online. There was a second stream of work which deepened into these first results of the project, and it ran a case study analysis on 4 key scenarios for delivering services. And also it provided some further insight And this deliverable, the results of this work has been published in Deliverable 12.2 at the moment under EC review. Still, the document is publicly accessible. When we will share the slides later, you will have the links as well. And then the last one is what we are presenting today. Given this whole experience, in these two phases, we decided, okay, let's do a final evaluation. Let's see how the landscape has changed around us, what is the new knowledge, and how we can polish and finalize the concept around business model and procurement and define recommendations for future activities. So there were 3 tasks, 5 partners that you can see listed below. We have GEANT, GI, CERN, SERF, and ULIC Supercomputing Center. There is also a related work that came from other areas of the project. In particular, there is I want to point you to 2 key documents. One is on the left-hand side, EOSC-hub, a briefing paper on provision of cross-border services. This is a joint work between the Task 2.3, that is about sustainability and governance, looking at the wider EOSC, and then Work Package 12. This provides some analysis on what are the challenges in delivering services across borders, especially when you have involved institutions that are from the public sector from both sides. What are the roles that are important in this EOSC? And it provides quite a good number of insights that have been then also shared with the EOSC governance. Then you have a very fresh publication that is the final governance and sustainability roadmap. What you hear today also was brought as into this picture. That's more the wider picture of the thinking around the governance sustainability of what has been produced by the project and how this can be taken forward in future activities. And it also provides a number of recommendations for more general for the EOSC. This was published a few days ago. It is under EC review. Still, it is publicly accessible for your access. So after the setting the scene, so I provided you an introduction to the key concepts that are essential to understand the scope of the work and what will be presented by Fotis. I will hand over now the word to Fotis to continue with this part. Thank you.
Thanks, Sergio. So quickly going into the content, because we have quite a few slides. So the outline of my talk, the deliverable contents, I will present quickly the methodology, the business models and related patterns identified, mapping of business models into EOSC, some roadmap and steps for the future and main challenges ahead, the feedback from interviews that we have conducted with key stakeholders, and I will close with a set of recommendations. A glimpse into the table of contents. It's more or less the same with the outline. And as Sergio was saying, we are at the final stages of this deliverable. It will be published in the next.
Oh, just one comment. We see the presentation view, not the full screen. Maybe you need to switch.
Thanks. No.
Okay, now we see the full screen. Yes. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, anyway, yeah. Now my window switched as well. So regarding the methodology, there are 3 horizontal tracks. Track 1, which is input from project. Track 2, which is input from the EOSC governance work. And track 3, which is more the desk research, state-of-the-art review. And there are also 5 vertical tracks, state-of-the-art review from projects mainly EOSC-hub, as Sergio was saying, and OCRE, which did a lot of work on procurement. Then The work from the EOS governance, maybe the executive board and its working groups, Syria, of course, the strategic research and innovation agenda, the sustainability working group, the Fair Lady document and its 2 studies on business models and costs, and again, you know, the literature review on business models for non-profits. We also extended the business model canvas for NGOs with some more cells for the research community. We will publish this also in the deliverable. So some key requirements and definitions and directions, key requirements from the projects and lessons learned from OCRE, which has been doing this work of procurement. One main point is that as part of the draft work program, there is a decision to move towards public procurement for the EOS core already in 2022. And I think I covered this point. Then moving to the, to the analysis, the identification and analysis of business models and patterns, as Sergio was saying, and assessment, and also the relevance to EOSC. And all this leading, to the possible approaches, the different business models, and the key recommendations. Now we're part of this feedback cycle. We did already a set of interviews, and we'll be soon finalizing the deliverable. I guess you see some of this as well, so I remove it. So the main foreseen change in the horizon, as I was saying, is this move from grants to public procurement for EOS core and probably parts of EOS Exchange. This is not fully clear, but probably some parts of EOS Exchange are also included in order to take up after the end of the EOS future project. This is currently foreseen towards the end, maybe Q3 or later in 2022, and it will be run by the European Commission. There is also an additional procurement for a research repository for fair digital objects. Probably this will be coming later on. And of course, a lot of grants complement the picture in different areas or destinations. The fair EOSC ecosystem with innovative services, web of fair data, and so on. Next generation tools, methods, and solutions. A lot of calls, of course, around research infrastructures, ESFRIs, and so on in different domains, health, green and digital transformation, and so on. And of course, a lot of support actions as well. What happened? Okay. A brief comparison between EC grants and procurement with the help of experts. For grants, these come out of call of proposals, while in procurement we have a call for tenders. The legal instrument is a grant agreement, and in the procurement is a contract. Here we have a major difference. So the procurement is much more stricter, which imposing, let's say, reciprocal obligations. We have some more information on this later on. In grants, the profit is not supposed to be the case, while in procurement, the contractor may include a margin of profit. Regarding ownership and IPR, usually this remains with the beneficiary in grants, and usually this remains with the procurer in procurement, although there are also some other recent directives, especially for SMEs that we have that came into our attention lately. And then regarding EC contribution, in procurement, the Commission pays 100% of the contract price, while in grants, this may not always be the case. Of course, there may be grants funded also 100%. Regarding EOSC procurement and strengths and weaknesses, of course, one may say that moving towards procurement, this may contribute towards professionalization and operationalization of the services based on a more transparent and stricter public procurement framework. As we were saying, it foresees sanctions and more means to deliver for the suppliers. For example, with bid bonds, guarantee letters, performance bonds, and so on. One can also say that there is opening up towards industry and also towards an EU market, aligning with the commodity services and promoting innovation, and probably this is also in line with a broader longer-term commitment of the Commission and member states in the EOS partnership, contributing towards sustainability. On the other hand, there are more, there is more bureaucracy in tenders. They are more complex, more time-consuming in the preparation, with market consultations, publications in the EU journals, and so on, expression of interest and things like that. Then, as you know, the public research providers have made significant investments over the past year, and they have several limitations in their statutes, and this poses some risks in their participation in a tender. So, for example, the limitations could be, that they may not be able to invoice, especially across borders, or issue some of the bonds, or accept financial risk and penalty clauses. There may be also limitations in offering part of the resources across borders, or in the amount of revenue generated from paid services. And also, procurement is probably less flexible than grants. In grants, probably, there is it's easier to change things with the reviews, and and probably make some change of direction, or take into account new requirements. And EOSC is a kind of sophisticated environment, not yet commodity. Even EOS core services are not yet commodity, so there may be some lack of flexibility there. Moving towards this EOS partnership diagram, which is interesting. It's a bit old, and already there have been some changes, in the EOSC association, in the different boards you see there. But I think also in the Commission work program, the tenders were also missing. So there is a first tender coming up as planned in the draft work program. Of course, this will be discussed more with the member states. Apparently, this will be the work program will be approved most probably in April and published in May. What is interesting here is this bubble on the EOSC association. It says association budget for additional service and points to the core. So this may be a way for the association to procure some small services and complement, the procurement and also the grants, giving, to adapt to new requirements or changing requirements. Of course, now, this is not planned yet, as we have checked. The EOSC association is just setting up the main offices and so on, hiring and doing some basic stuff. But this is an interesting thing to keep in mind for the future. So moving towards the business models, this is not a complete picture, but this is probably the most relevant ones for the upcoming period. There is a first set of business models relevant to procurement. So a general case of public procurement, framework agreement, demand aggregation, and CPB. There is also virtual access. I will explain later on, but probably most of you are aware of the basic principles. There is this cross-border pooling of resources in kind and or in cash, and there is this exemption to the directive, to the main directive, cutting across procurement. So public to public cooperation with cost recovery. I will go into the details later on. As Sergio was saying, we also identified patterns, so designing principles that can be reused also broadly. Of course, they stem from the business models, more or less. I'll go briefly into these. Let the best emerge is the plain case, let's say, of procurement, stimulating competition, and so on. Then there is simplifying, streamlining the procurement process, which is probably the derivative of the first one, also aggregating aggregating demand for economies of scale. Then opening up existing research resources to more researchers, especially for research infrastructures. This applies to virtual access. Joint funding on common interest in cash or in kind, and public-to-public cooperation with reimbursement of costs. So I will go into the details now. So the first one is the general case, let's say, of public procurement with a direct contract. This can be procured by national bodies or the Commission. The underlying legal framework is this Directive 2014-24. The Commission has its own financial regulations, but they broadly follow the directive, and also the member states have to follow the directive. There may be some adaptations at local level, but overall, they have to follow it. So this is a plain case without framework agreement or central purchasing body, and usually the valuation is done based on optimal technical solution or lowest price or a combination of the two. Then the next one is, a special case with a framework agreement. The framework agreement gives more flexibility as, over the contracted time, more orders can be done under the framework agreement via the selected pool of suppliers. So at the end of the evaluation, there is a pool of suppliers, and you can, over the contracted time, you can order more quantities, especially if you don't know the exact quantities in the very beginning. Another variation of the framework agreement is the dynamic purchasing system. In this case, new suppliers can be added over time. So this is even more flexible, but the problem is that in order to take this approach, excuse me, you have to know very well in advance the requirements, and you have to to specify very well the requirements, which might not be the case for non-commodity services. So this is more appropriate for commodity services. BM3 is another variation with demand aggregation and the central purchasing body. For example, Jan was doing this in OCRE on behalf of the NRNs, the National Research and Education Networks. Of course, when you aggregate demand, you get better terms or conditions, maybe more suppliers, better quality, better prices, and overall economies of scale. Yes, and by the way, OCRE was also doing a framework agreement, so it combined these two business models. Moving on to virtual access. This is a special financial instrument as part of research infrastructures, including infrastructures, work programs. It reimburses the cost of service providers. They're called access providers as grant beneficiaries. So they submit a proposal. They have a special table on the costs, and then they are reimbursed on these costs to provide provide access to researchers. The virtual access is provided free and openly via the internet. So there is no selection of users. Another variation of this is the transnational access, which is can be both, let's say, physical and remote. And in this case, TNA has a user selection. Virtual access reimburses mainly the operational expenses, but can also be extended to include some capital expenses via the unit costs. And there are several examples of this virtual access being used in several projects, infrastructures, and many more in the research infrastructure domain. And as far as we know, this mechanism will continue to apply to the Horizon Europe grants. And the related underlying framework is the EC, of course, framework programs and work programs. Moving on to the business models on in-kind and in-cash, the BM5 is cross-border pooling of resources in-kind from member states and associated countries. This is community pooling the resources into a central hub based on some scientific collaboration, maybe thematic or something, possibly based on an MOU. This also increases the likelihood of serving peak demands. And there are several examples in the research infrastructures, ESFRIs, ERICS, and so on. Also the CERN-led worldwide LHC computing grid WLCG. BM6 is another variation within CAS from the Commission or from the member states. And again, this, a lot of ESFRIs are using this this business model. Or ERICS and so on. And ESFRIs have a roadmap process, and as part of this process, they get EC grants in cash. But of course, the countries, also the member states and associated countries, also put a lot of money in cash for the construction of the RIs. This is the underlying principle on the EOS partnership, of course, with the Commission putting 450 million and the member states matching, or probably it will be more times matching the contribution from the Commission. Also for the Euro HPC joint undertaking for the supercomputing centers, but also for other competence centers and so on. Moving to the public cooperation with cost recovery. As I said, this is an exemption to the directive, so you don't need to go through a tender. This is a cooperation between two or more public bodies that don't have a direct relationship. There are three conditions that need to apply. They need to work to cooperate on a broader common objective. They need to work for the public interest, and there are some limitations in the percentages of it should be less than 20% of the activities performed in the open market. So these conditions are not so difficult to let's say to apply as part of EOSC. And then the supplier, the public body acting as supplier, which will be offering the services to another public body, can be reimbursed, so they can get its cost reimbursed. We currently are not aware of such examples. There was an effort in Elixir to, let's say, to simulate this approach, but we are not actually aware of any examples to using this. But this is a very interesting point to investigate as part of the EOSC association. So, and its members, this means members offering services to the EOSC association and to EOSC, of course, overall, and getting reimbursed. And this may give also some flexibility in case there are changing requirements, or providing additional services to the EOSC core and exchange. This is another variation of another exemption, let's say another variation of the public-to-public cooperation. This is a vertical case where there is a direct relationship between the two public sector bodies, so there is some kind of control. And in fact, the test case is that one of the two public bodies exercises control as if it was its own department, so it's quite strong. We don't think that this can apply at European level unless there is maybe a research organization that has other entities in different countries, but it can apply, of course, at national level. And this is also very useful, especially for institutes where they have members similar to the association, to the EOSC association, and the lead members can do procurement on behalf of their members, or for example, universities or something. So mapping the business models to EOSC, as was said into the EOSC Executive Board final report, different parts of EOSC will be using different business models. So we subscribe to this point. The first three business models, of course, are widely used for procurement at national and institutional level, of course, to buy services in this case, and buy computing and networking circuits and so on. For the EC procurement of EOS Core and probably some parts of EOS Exchange foreseen in 2022, we believe that the hybrid model BM2 and BM3, so framework agreement with some elements of demand aggregation, would be quite a flexible one. Of course, the Commission has a lot of expertise on this. So with the framework agreement, again, new orders over the contracted time and with the demand aggregation, better terms and conditions and prices and so on. BM4, as we said, will still apply to the Horizon Europe grants. BM5 and BM6, they are inherent in EOSC and also in the research infrastructure generics. So they will be used widely, and the public-to-public cooperation should be investigated for the EOSC Association and the BM8 at national level. So probably all of them are relevant for the next phase of EOSC. So some elements for the future. The business models for EOSC need to be selected. As we said, the roles of the different governance parties need to be defined, monitoring the progress and applicability of the business model, the role of the EOSC Association. Remember the slide with the figure of the partnership and this extra role that may be considered. Also the public-to-public cooperation. So these roles need to be discussed. Maybe there can be also studied. There can be also studies. Preparation of all relevant parties for Horizon Europe, including the procurement and coming procurements. Foresee flexibility, as we were saying, to the EOS complex environment. And finally, there should be also a contingency plan for the EOS procurement, the first one, in case the relevant stakeholders are not enough. Probably the Commission will go through market consultations. So if the research community or industry even do not express interest, or there is not sufficient interest, let's say, in the tender, there is a way to fall back from tender to grant. The other way is not possible, from a grant to tender, but this may be possible if things do not go well. 3 slides on the feedback from interviews. We have conducted around 15 interviews with key stakeholders from different categories, infrastructure providers, policymakers and funding agencies, people from ministries as well, user communities, procurement experts. The first main point was the suitability of public procurement for EOSC. The majority of the interviewees agreed to confirm this professionalized and operationalized and accountable approach, but there were a lot of people raising, the point of considerable challenges that may be faced by the public research providers in submitting bids given their inherent restrictions. In some cases, we got from the interviewees that these restrictions may be overcome with proactive efforts, in some cases not. Then industry interest should be investigated, and then also a mechanism to review the business model applicability and procurement progress over time. The second main point was whether EOSC requirements can be properly addressed via public procurement. First of all, it was raised that it is not clear which parts of EOS Exchange will be included. There is, this platform as a service with computing and storage and so on services, and also the software as a service. Probably some parts of EOS Exchange are there, but it's not very clear. Then, to answer the question, the majority said that the EOS core is let's say, closer to commoditization. Of course, not that yet there, but it will be easier to move EOS core to procurement. But there are still also few stated that services in EOS core are not mature yet for procurement. Regarding EOS Exchange, the vast majority said that it's much more complex. They call it a different beast. One interesting point was that different business models can apply to EOS Exchange to operate these data spaces. So, and the role of integrators, integrating data, software, and other resources from both the public research providers and the private sector. With this, we may come up with new business models. we don't know, but this needs to be explored further. There is a wide variety of requirements by the different communities, so very diverse and different. So overall, different maturity in EOS components and different business models are needed. This was confirmed. Then some last points from interviews. The vast majority said that they identified business model and patterns were appropriate for this current new phase. Regarding intellectual property, there were some comments saying that licensing should be as open to the, applied to the software, services, data, and so on should be as open as possible, and access rights to the IP should allow for the exploitation by the procurer, which will, for the first case will be the Commission, and I guess the Commission also said that they will they want to have the IP with the member states and the associated states participating. This is a follow-up point of the previous one. There needs to be follow-up with Gaia X and collaborate with related efforts and identify possibly new relevant models with this data integrator idea. So some main challenges ahead. As we said, I think this was covered, that the public funded research providers have restrictions and limitations. They are very well acquainted with the EOSC environment, but they have limitations in their statutes and so on. I won't cover this again. On the other hand, the industrial suppliers are of course very well acquainted with procurement, but they are not well acquainted with the EOSC requirements. So in order to participate, they need to familiarize with the research community environment and and the different beasts, as we were saying before, on especially EOSC exchange and core. The requirement specification is always challenging in advance, so to foresee the requirements and how this may be changing in the future, especially for EOS exchange. Of course, we don't know which parts of EOS exchange will be procured. It's not fully clear, but even for EOS core, I think this is an issue. And again, the EOS governance roles may not be still fully clear in the upcoming environment. We had some examples about the role of the association, whether it will be using procurement and so on. So, and finally, 3 slides on recommendation. Short term, a thorough analysis of business models in EOSC and selection of business models need to take place. There is already a proposal for a new EOSC advisory group on sustaining EOSC and a task force on funding and business model for EOSC. This is very good. It may be better if a plural form is used here, as there may be multiple funding and business models for the EOSC ecosystem, including the national level. Further business models can be identified for EOS Exchange to operate these data spaces, as we were saying, in collaboration with key stakeholders, including industry. Proactive preparation for public procurement is needed, so the EC needs to work well in advance in preparing the EOS core, the first tender on EOS core, in collaboration with key stakeholders, of course, the governance, but also the EOS future may have a role there. I think it's also mentioned in the work program. Market consultations, of course, have to be done for both the research providers and industrial suppliers. Then the requirements specifications should start early and engage experts and ensure maximum flexibility to adapt to the dynamic environment of EOSC. Then, of course, in parallel, the research providers, the public research providers and the industrial suppliers need to work and do their homework to prepare for the first tender on getting the legal and financial expertise, understanding the limitations and whether they can be overcome, and also better understanding the cost in case they submit a bid. A joint consortium may be considered of both research providers and industry to provide a bid for this tender, for this first tender, and the coordinator should be also well thought of in advance. I think this was covered, the roles of the association and the rest of the EOS governance. And also awareness raising needs to be to take place in the coming period about the different tools, and also engage the procurement experts, possibly in some more studying and so on. And the last slide, mid to longer term recommendation, a stepwise approach in the EOS development is needed. I think this is followed already in the work programs and in the in the different developments. An interim evaluation is needed at intermediate steps, and of course the EOSC governance, but also input from other key stakeholders needs to be included to continue, let's say, to develop strategies. There is RIA, of course, and different scenarios for the future, a sustainability strategy, and how to best operationalize EOSC. Grants, of course, will be always be required for the innovation. There is a cycle, with the innovation services, then some services are put into operation and so on. So this continues, and possibly in the longer term, further engagement of industry and expansion towards public sector with citizen science and things like that. But this is probably far away. So, and this, thank you very much. This is the team. The concrete team on 12.3, which is a subset of the whole partners, as Sergio was saying in the beginning. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fotis, for this overview on the results. And let's bring back my video again.
So I stop sharing, Sergio.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a number of questions already, and I'd like to go through them. And okay, there was a first question from Roxana about what is if you can spend a couple of words on what is a framework agreement. And I already replied. I'll just give you a brief overview. So there's a specific terminology or concept that is being defined in the EU public directive, in the EU directive for public procurement. And usually when public organizations need to buy services or goods from the market, they above certain thresholds, they need to launch, they need to follow and launch a public tender. So one way to prepare a specific tender and to buy a specific service or good, but then for a new purchase, you will need to repeat it. And if you have many purchases to be done also by the same organization, by a network of organizations, this can have some administrative burden to be repeated because it's a kind of long process and some administrative costs. So a framework agreement is another option where the tender would basically would define the requirements for providers to apply. Providers would become pre-approved providers. They would agree on certain terms and conditions. Then once this agreement is defined, the authorized public organizations could buy from this framework agreement doing a normal order, and they just invoice. So they will receive an invoice that they will pay. So they don't need to repeat the tender, which is an expensive process usually. So that's if you are familiar with the OCRE project, that project adopted the framework agreement as a way to create a market for commercial cloud services. And so that was the first question. Then there was a question from Vanessa on how do you suggest to allow for more equal participation in procurement by non-for-profit, who, as you say, don't often have the capacity to engage in these large procurement tenders. Can additional support be provided to this type of organizations to help them participate, or is procurement targeted towards for-profit and other models targeted toward non-profit? That's very interesting question. Good question. So I will start the question. Then actually, one thing we didn't mention in the course of this work, also we relied on an expert in public procurement. So public procurement is very is regulated procurement, requires legal background, and it's a complex matter. So we relied on a consultant that is connected to this webinar. So I'm invited to add a couple more words. But in general, okay, what also for us was a learning process. And because usually public organizations are well knowledgeable on the procurement as a buyer side, but not as a seller side, because that usually that's not their role to sell. And so when you switch the role, then okay, you start understanding there are many things to pay attention to. So in general, the public procurement does not, the public procurement regulation, it says that that applies to public institutions who are defined as contracting authorities. And but in general, on the bidder side, those who reply to a tender because they want to offer services or goods, there's no limitation on the nature of the organization. So it does not limit if it's a profit or non-profit organization. Still, there are inherent limitations from public organization to be able to act and sell on the commercial market, so on the market. Maybe I will try to give a word to
Sergio, if I may also complement, I think you know, for the non-profits to participate in tenders, it's up mostly to the national laws and their you know, policies and their bylaws and statutes. So they need to have the local experts. I think this is the important point. Because there may be difference in the different countries, difference in how the different organizations, you know, are constructed and built. So, but I think yes, I hand over to Ohad, who is the real expert on this.
Yes. Good morning. Good afternoon. I think Sergio explained it quite well. On the question on participation of non-for-profit organizations as bidders. So from a legal perspective, there is no limitation for anyone to submit a proposal as a bidder in a public procurement process. What you may see in practice is that non-for-profit organizations may be maybe on average less experienced in submitting proposals for public procurement tenders. And secondly, in some of those organizations, not all of them, but some may have internal restrictions, either due to their statutes or bylaws that require them not to carry out certain activities or even participate in open tenders, or there may be simply by instructions of their controlling entities that may want to reserve the services of that non-for-profit organizations to their controlling entities themselves. So take an example of universities controlling, let's say, a group of 5 or 10 universities controlling a specific entity that they have established, and they would like to have that entity providing services to the controlling universities only, and therefore not to participate in tenders by third parties. Yeah, so that's more or less. There may be, of course, particular considerations for specific non-for-profit organizations, but the key is, if I could just add, the key is for non-for-profit organizations is, in cases where they lack the knowledge or experience, is training, is simply to train and to understand the process a little bit better in order to improve the chances of success.
Okay, thank you all for this clarification. And Yeah, then for instance, when also still on the Vanessa's question on if there are other models target to non-for-profit. And for instance, yeah, grant is the usual way that for non-for-profit organizations, an easier way to get funding to participate in service delivery, like, I don't know, the virtual access mechanism that was explained. And so there are, yeah, different legal framework, different fundings pose different requirements to the organization. And we'll go to the next question. We have from Victoria. The business models have different customer segment and value proposition. Which of those will be more profitable in terms of cost revenue? So what we presented today actually is not, let's say, you can see us more as a business model template, because we focus more on the funding part and what are the, in our analysis, if you want to fund services in the EOSC, what kind of funding structures we can use, what are the limitations and advantages that come with them. Mm-hmm. Then to go into specific details, that need to be customized. For instance, if you need a monitoring service for the EOSC core, or if you are providing computing capacity through the exchange, then okay, there's some customization, like for who you do, what is your cost structure, what are your revenues, etc. So that the profitability, I would say, in terms of the amount of profitability depends on how each individual organization can organize their own cost of revenues. On the other side, we can say that some business models that we presented do not allow profit, others allow. So when we go to public procurement, as we said, profit is possible. When we use a grant as a funding structure, that's not possible. So that's maybe the consideration we can do here. And then the next one, we have a question from an anonymous person, that is, are you saying that the EOS core services will be commercial in nature, and does the EOS core or EOSC is dependent on for-profit services? No, this was not actually the message. The question is the following. At the moment, if you consider the EOSC-hub project was grant-based, and the providers of the EOS core were mostly public fund institutions who have a mission to support this ecosystem. EOSC Future is still grant-based, and the EOS core will continue to be delivered under this grant-based system that is easily accessible by public fund institutions. Still, in the new draft of the Horizon Europe program, we foresee that the EC wants to use the procurement funding instrument for the follow-up of the to sustain the EOS core beyond the life of the EOS Future. Mm-hmm. So procurement means that that will open to the market. So it means that the organization who want to participate as a provider need to operate like a market, like in the market. So they need to submit a bid, they need to compete potentially with also industries who may want to access. Then all this depends, of course, how the tender will be written and the constraints that will be put there. Mm-hmm. And still, the way to operate with the procurement is a typical instrument where public organizations buy from the market. So that's change. So that's why we said in our recommendations, when doing the preparation for the tender, there should be a careful analysis of what will be the impact to the current stakeholders delivering core services. Is it a matter just readiness in preparing for tender, or they actually cannot do it? So that's the clarification. I hope it was clear. Roxana asked how the business models were identified. So they were identified based on the previous work on the work package 12. So we had 2 phases. We did the market research. We've seen how services were normally delivered, what kind of funding structure. We did a case study-based validation in that we published in Deliverable 12.2. So these are the most relevant we have observed that are used in the research sector. We don't say this is the full complete list. Maybe there will be some For instance, one we didn't capture is what the Géant is using to deliver the networking via this framework program agreement with the Commission. That could be an additional business model we could add. And the idea here is to provide a kind of toolbox of possible business models that can help the reasoning on how we want to structure and organize different parts of the EOSC. There is a question from Dale. Would you be prepared to venture a comparison of the relative pro and cons of procurement versus in-kind resource sharing in the EOSC? That would be an interesting exercise to do. And besides what we told until now, I mean, what we can say, okay, the initial evaluations I can say here would be that usually when you have in-kind resources, one of the, for instance, is a typical instrument when member states want to collaborate to provide, to contribute to a common goal by providing with services and goods from their own countries. So they would organize the funding nationally according to the funding structures and spend nationally, and then maybe join forces by joining services via in-kind contribution. That could be one scheme. Procurement is more usually in-kind contribution is used when you can spend on public organizations, research organizations that then deliver services free of point of use. Procurement is more, let's say, as we said before, more a commercial type or market-oriented approach to organize service delivery. That would be my initial reaction.
Yeah, if I may add, I think both of these models will be used in this phase of EOSC in Horizon Europe, because, you know, there is the partnership with the commitments from the Commission and the member states, and the member states, you know, the Commission in cash and the member states in kind. And of course, there will be the procurement if things go well, sorry. So I think it will be a combination of different business models, as we're saying. So both of these will be used. It's not one or the other. So it's a, you know, it's a combination of several business models used in this overall framework.
Thanks. Then we got a question from Jessica. What do you see as the next steps tasks regarding business model for the EOSC Association, EOSC partnerships? That's an interesting question. And so we are aware that the EOSC Association is drafting charters for new task forces and advisory groups. And one of these advisory groups that is planned is EOSC funding models. So in my view, that's probably the closest context where this kind of discussion can be taken forward. And that's actually our goal. Actually, is what our one of the main recipient for this work we see is the EOSC governance, and in particular now that we know this task force will be in place to be delivered to them, and so they can move forward. And Vanessa asked who will make the recommendation, the decision on the business models for the EOSC, and if there will be an open consultation. That's definitely will be the EOSC governance through the, first of all, there will be involvement of the stakeholder through this task force, and then the results and recommendations will be passed through the different layers of the governance. And that's up to them and the funding agencies to make the final decisions, I would say. Justin is asking, you talked about the fallback from tender to grant being possible if there is a little interest in tender. Do you have an opinion on whether there should be further checkpoints before tenders are offered in the first place? And for instance, whether the requirements of the core services are sufficiently known or still lie in the exploratory realm? So that's actually something we learned that we understood, okay, I heard in a former event that eventually the EC can choose to reverse the procurement to a grant if the market is not mature. And so usually, also as was explained by Howard, our procurement expert, normally what a public organization does before starting launching a tender, it does a market consultation. So there is, they want to, usually there's this step called the prior information notice, where they already publish a kind of preliminary version of the tender. They say, we want to buy this kind of service in the future in a few months' time. And what would be, and then they try to check the market, the readiness, and they do this consultation. That
Yes.
could be one instrument.
And as an answer to this process, there may be expression of interest, and you can assess, some points. Of course, this is very preliminary, but you get an idea of who is intending to, to prepare a bid and what they may offer and so on. So you get a bit of this is a regular part of the procurement process. Let's say. So, and if this goes ahead, we have only 1.5 years from now, roughly. So yes, things have to start probably very soon. Yeah.
Then we have a comment and question from René. Are the stated challenges not in fact complete EOSC showstoppers? In that, if EOSC is not only about EU-funded services, data or infrastructure, for instance, also about opening, sharing national resources, then which motivation or business models does providers have to offer or acquire anything across EU borders?
I may say a couple of things here. From the interviews, at least, we saw that there may be showstoppers for some cases, in other cases not. So the picture is not fully clear, but there may be some, public research providers able to submit bids, and this, through this process. We said before, it will be clear whether the market will be mature or not.
Mm-hmm. Then we have one more question from Ornella. How do you see the continuation of this work since EOSC-hub is ending? Will it be continued by the EOSC Association in EOSC Future? And definitely will be continued, we expect, by the EOSC Association through this task force. And EOSC Future, I'm not sure if there is a specific task on this topic. And but anyway, there will be this task force that will be probably the key, let's say, discussion part for the follow-up of this work. Question from Victoria: how are you going to evaluate the different business models? So if you go to see the Deliverable 12.2, where we had this case study analysis, we identified a number of criteria and to evaluate the different business models. That's already public. So there were some criteria like, I don't know, like a fit for EOSC, or easiness to go through, to use it, to put in place. They were like, what are the regulatory and laws that are applicable? What are the limitations they pose into the participation by selecting certain funding scheme, and so on. Also, this kind of analysis will be picked up and also added into the our final deliverable that should be available by mid-April at the latest. And there will be some strengths and weaknesses we identify for each of them that are more documented a bit more in detail. Then there's a question of who will lead the EOSC funding models task force. That's not defined yet at the moment. April will be focusing on writing the charter, with the rules and what will be the goal of the funding model task force, and who will be the members, how the membership will work. And then there may be the case the membership will be open for application. Maybe the EOS governance will select experts. This we don't know yet, it needs to be defined. And then there will be a chair that, according to the rule, needs to be a person from the EOS General Assembly, if I'm right, I think I remember correctly. So the chair would come from the General Assembly, while the participation may be open to the community according to the rules that will be defined. I think we finished all the questions. So we just after the end of the webinar, we will send you the slides. And so at least you have early access to the slides today. And as we have almost 20 minutes after the official end, I think we can close the webinar unless somebody wants to say anything. I don't see any raised hands. So I would like to thank you for your participation. It was very, I hope you enjoyed the content we shared. You found it useful. Thanks for your very rich set of questions, where some were challenging. We know we made one step forward. We hope we contribute to bring clarity and support the discussion on finding the best way to organize the European Open Science Cloud. And we will keep contributing through the new structure that will become available, like the EOSC task force on EOSC funding business models. And we hope that, yeah, we all will succeed in creating a very useful EOSC for the research. Fotis, you want to say anything?
I would also like to thank you all. And yes, I think this is work ongoing, and we should be, please also, raise awareness on this work. And I think this needs to be continued as part of the task force and the governance. Yes, and we will do our best to contribute. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.